Returning to our top story now here on RT, Russia and China have vetoed the latest Western-backed draft resolution on Syria at the UN Security Council. And joining us live now is one of the men who raised his hand in that no vote, Moscow's envoy to the world body, Vitaly Churkin. Mr. Churkin, Russia's decision to veto this latest resolution has caused consternation and widespread criticism of Moscow's stance. Is Russia supporting the Assad regime?
Of course not. It's about what needs to be done in order to settle the crisis. Unfortunately, the strategy of our Western colleagues seems to be to try to whip up tensions in and around Syria at every opportunity. And this time they took the occasion of the need to extend the mandate of the monitoring mission in Syria and attached a number of unacceptable clauses to their draft resolution. So we needed to veto, together with China, that unacceptable draft, to allow Kofi Annan more space to work on the document which was adopted by foreign ministers of a number of countries of the so-called action group, which calls for setting up a transitional national body, and that requires, of course, dialogue between various parties. So in this context, to introduce a resolution which would only entail pressure and almost inevitable sanctions on the Syrian government did not look like a good idea to us at all. And we went ahead and blocked a decision which, in our view, was counterproductive.
So Moscow not supporting the Assad regime, but America, Britain and France say that Russia's failed the Syrian people today. How do you react to that?
Well, they are quite good and bad and loud about their propaganda. I think what they have been doing in criticizing Russia and China, and sometimes quite stridently, today it was the British and the French perm reps who went out of their way, unfortunately, piling all sorts of falsehoods on the foreign policies of Russia and China. They should focus more on the need to help Kofi Annan. Unfortunately, they haven't done anything at all in order to set and train a productive and positive process in Syria. Instead, they have been working with the so-called friends of Syria. In fact, this is a group of countries who are enemies of the Syrian government. I wouldn't call them enemies of the Syrian people, but certainly those who want to topple the Syrian government, disregarding the consequences, which are extremely tragic, which such policy inevitably entails, because the government or President Assad, it's not simply one individual or a group of individuals. They represent, of course, a certain segment of the Syrian population, a certain power structure, which has existed there for decades. So to break it would cause, and is causing, trying to break it, considerable trouble and bloodshed. To reform it through dialogue, this would be a much more reasonable line of action, and this is what Russia has been advocating.
But dialogue hasn't achieved anything so far. Isn't it now an overwhelming global sense that something has to be done to stop the killing of innocent people? And what about intervention on humanitarian grounds? Is that not acceptable to Moscow? I know Moscow is very concerned about Chapter 7. I don't want to get into technicalities, but Chapter 7 leading to perhaps military intervention. But what about some form of intervention to stop the killing?
Well, in a way, the monitoring group, which we are trying to maintain, is a way of sort of political intervention in trying to, practical intervention in trying to deter violence. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened, it hasn't been successful. I mean, you said that dialogue has not achieved anything. The problem is that the dialogue has not started yet. The opposition groups refuse to enter into dialogue with the Syrian government, which says it is prepared for dialogue. They should try that offer of the Syrian government to enter into dialogue. And this is a major missing link, a major impediment in the way of Kofi Annan's activity. You know, humanitarian intervention, unfortunately, it only sounds humane. But the fact of the matter is that any military intervention, for whatever reason, is inevitably going to cause more bloodshed. And you know, we know that those greatest humanists in the world, US and UK, intervened in Iraq, for instance, citing all sorts of noble pretexts, in that particular case, non-existent weapons of mass destruction. What it caused is 115,000 civilian deaths alone, to say nothing of, you know, millions of refugees, displaced persons, and the whole dislocation in the country. So don't be duped by humanitarian rhetoric. There is much more geopolitics in their policy in Syria than humanism. And unfortunately, the practical consequences of their policy is that the conflict and bloodshed is not abating.
You mentioned geopolitics, and I understand that you mentioned the fact that what's happening in Syria is actually aimed at what's going to happen in Iran eventually. Can you explain that Iran is the eventual goal out of all of this?
I did refer to Iran, but in a slightly different context. I wouldn't rule out that then they will move on to Iran, but I was not referring to that. I was, in my remarks at the stakeout earlier today in the United Nations, I was referring to their clear interest, and this is a major motivation of their policy and their effort to topple President Assad, in curbing Iranian influence in the Middle East and that entire region. And it's also a major motivation of the other Middle Eastern fighters for democracy, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who are concerned about what they see Iranian interests. Of course, in Bahrain as well, they claim that the Shia protest there is sort of Iranian-sponsored, even though some observers, including your colleagues, journalists who have experienced on the ground, believe that it happens to be genuine protest against a system which is not entirely too democratic, to put it mildly. So a clear geopolitical dimension is there in the policies of a number of countries who are extremely aggressive vis-à-vis Syria, and it has nothing to do with the interests of the Syrian people. And because what the Syrian people need is to find...
Yes, can I ask you, though, what is the worry for Moscow, all these geopolitical implications, which you've explained so clearly? Why is Moscow so worried about this?
We are not...
in what way could Moscow be affected?
We are not worried about... Well, we are not worried about geopolitical implications of sort of that particular thing, even though we believe that a greater confrontation with Iran is hurting, is unnecessary. And of course, we are directly involved in efforts to resolve peacefully the problem of the Iranian nuclear program. And you know, this growing tension between Iran and the West and Saudis, it's not helpful. Our concern is that the Syrian people have to suffer the consequences of this geopolitical struggle. And our concern is that the focus of everybody's policy must be the benefit of the Syrian people. And the only way they can put an end to this tragic conflict is to get to the negotiating table. And there is a good ground. There is a document, which was a consensus document adopted by the Group of Action Foreign Ministers in Geneva 2.5 weeks ago, which says that a transitional national body needs to be set up. And it cannot be set up by sanctions. It cannot be set up by more pressure on just one side. The Syrian government, which is claiming that it is ready for such dialogue, has designated its representative for such a dialogue. But so far, the interest from the opposition is not there. And we see extreme opposition groups, armed opposition groups, resorting to more and more violence and even terrorist attacks like the one we saw yesterday in Damascus. This is not to say that the Syrian government has not resorted to excessive violence at times. They have made very serious mistakes and blunders over the months, but the time to end it, unless we want it to continue for years, is to enter into dialogue.
Mr. Churkin, Russia's really stuck by its principles of non-intervention. Is it not, though, in danger of being isolated, bearing in mind the continual vetoing of the sanctions in the UN Security Council and, of course, the supplying of military hardware to Syria? Although Moscow, of course, says that this is not being used against civilians. But this, what does it do for Russia's reputation and, indeed, its relations after this crisis is over?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I think doing the right thing and not simply following somebody's catastrophic policy is something which makes me proud, and is something which eventually will be borne out as the right course of action and the right policy under these very difficult circumstances. And about vetoes, if I'm not mistaken, the United States has cast 60 vetoes on the Palestinian issue alone. So why don't you question my American colleagues about the impact of the image of the United States in the Middle East of those continuous vetoes, sometimes even vetoing their own presidential and Secretary of State public statements. So, you know, veto is a part of the UN Charter, and there is nothing wrong about casting it when you feel the need to do so.
Many people ask me, why is Russia taking this stance over Syria? Is it because, and the answer I still find very difficult to explain, is it because Russia's being misunderstood over this, or not explaining its position clearly enough?
You know, some people have different views. Sometimes there may be honest disagreement. When we have meetings with opposition groups, I have those meetings regularly. Just yesterday or the day before yesterday here in New York, I had another meeting with a group representing Syrian National Council, and some people really honestly believe that our course of action is not something which should be pursued, and we are explaining their side to them. But of course, let's face it, we are facing massive propaganda and manipulation of public opinion. Unfortunately, is a fact of life, and it happens every time there is a major political crisis. Today in the Security Council, unfortunately, we heard my British and French colleagues launch an outrageous monologue, you know, completely distorting Russia's foreign policy and our motivations. Well, people do what they have to do. I think, again, they should focus more on what they can do themselves to support Kofi Annan, rather than try to derail the political track in order to concentrate entirely on putting pressure on Damascus.
Can we talk about what happens next now? No agreement in the UN Security Council, but Russia has said that it would like to see an extension of the UN observer mission to Syria. But the monitors have actually made no visible impact on the conflict so far. What is the point in keeping the mission alive when so far it's failed?
What would be the point of their departure? We think that at least we have more chance to get objective information. If it's there, if the situation were to improve, they would be on the ground already, so they would be able to participate more actively in political process, and also in dealing with the humanitarian situation. So pulling them out is going to entail you know, negative consequences, and we want to avoid that. Unfortunately, now again, we seem to be entering another sort of little diplomatic battle, because what we were proposing, and in fact there was broad understanding among Security Council members that under these circumstances this is what needs to be done, the so-called technical rollover extension for like a period 30 to 45 days of the current mandate of the mission. But unfortunately, our British colleagues started playing some cheap political tricks again, and or diplomatic tricks again, and attached some political conditions and language to the draft resolution, which they pulled out from under the rug without warning everybody, at least us or China and most of the members of the Security Council. I'm sure they consulted duly with the Americans, but certainly not other permanent 5 members, and this is something which is not really a practice which is normal in the Security Council. But the important thing is that now we are going to have a discussion about really making it a technical rollover without loading it with political conditions and implications.
Can I just ask you one final question? There are rumors in some international media that Assad's wife has already fled. She's in Russia, so they say. If Assad were to fall, would Moscow give Assad safe refuge?
I have no idea.
If Assad were to fall, would
I have
Moscow
no
accept
idea
him?
about that. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, first of all, about his wife, I have no idea. I understand she's British. She has a British passport, so it's much easier for her to go to the UK. And our officials repeatedly said that this is pure fantasy. So I'm not simply going to add anything, or cannot add anything to that.
What Assad himself, though, if he were to seek refuge in Moscow?
This is exactly what I've said. Our officials repeatedly said that it's a complete fantasy, and I have nothing to do with that. It's just a joke when they ask this question.
I thought you were referring to his wife there. Sorry. Thank you very much indeed. We'll leave it there. Vitaly Churkin, we really appreciate your time. Russian ambassador to the UN, thank you very much indeed for explaining Moscow's situation during this crisis now. Thank you.